Captains of Industry, brought to you by Airtel.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. I'm Eleni Jakos. They say diamonds are a girl's best friend, and who else would know this better than the man who is responsible for growing one of the world's largest diamond brands. Launched in 2008, the Forevermark brand forms part of the De Beers group of companies, and the man at the helm of this company is the CEO, Stephen Lussier, and he's our Captain of Industry tonight. Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us. Great to have you on the program. You actually started your career with De Beers in 1981.
You know, I've been at it an awful long time. I sometimes hate to add up the years, but indeed, you know, I was a young man at the time, brought up in America, and you know, went to university, didn't know quite what to do. Advertising seemed a good thing. That's how I got originally associated with De Beers.
But actually, you've got a psychology background from university, and it's quite fitting that you'd actually get into the diamond industry.
Do you know, it's life is full of odd coincidences, and this was one. You know, psychology, I was fascinated by it, but I then went on to get my MBA in business, and I thought, how am I ever going to put these things together? But in the advertising world, and particularly in the world of diamonds, which are a product which is really deeply emotional, and it plays with some of the most important emotions in life. Actually, psychology wasn't a bad background at all.
Absolutely. I mean, De Beers had been running for almost 80 years back then in the early 80s, and I'm sure they already had a very well-established brand and very well known in the market. When you joined as part of the advertising and market strategy, what kind of scenarios did you deal with, and did you find very interesting strategies? Did you feel that you need to change a few things? What was your experience?
Do you know, the thing about De Beers is that they never really stand still, particularly in the marketing arena. They're always looking forward to where's the next opportunity. And when I joined, it was really, you know, a business where the diamond engagement ring was the sort of fundamental product and the base of the business. But as we saw diamond, you know, at that time we were faced with new diamond mines in places like Botswana, new supplies, and we had to think of ways in which we were going to create a substantially larger market. So our focus really was on two things. One, how could we in our existing markets, places like the United States, the major market, how could we find ways to encourage not just the one diamond, but, you know, multiple ownership? And then how could we go out in the world and find what were going to be our markets, you know, for the generation to come.
And what was the competitive environment like back then? I'm sure far easier than what it is right now, one would assume.
Yeah, I mean, the luxury goods field was not nearly as developed as we find it today. In some ways, you know, diamonds and De Beers, we were the first, in effect, to democratize luxury and to bring luxury to the majority, you know, of people. And then we saw companies like, you know, Louis Vuitton probably being, you know, the best do that in a broader industry of leather goods and accessories and watches. So the competition is much tougher, but a big part of our marketing challenge is to build an image for our product and a meaning for our product that actually makes us compete with no one. And that's why, you know, diamonds to us are all about emotion and love and preciousness and things that, you know, while a handbag is lovely, it will never mean quite the same thing.
Of course, diamonds are a girl's best friend, if I could just quantify that now. But you were also in charge. In 1985, you quickly went up to be market controller for the US and for Canada. You also started doing work in the Asian Pacific region, really focusing on Japan, from 1989 to 1991. Give us an indication of those years and how the brand actually started evolving and changing from the early 80s when you started heading up the division to the early 90s.
Yeah, indeed. You know, I was really fortunate. Sometimes timing is everything in life, and I've been fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And so when I went off to Asia, that was the time when Japan was really emerging as a power in the luxury goods field, and actually for, you know, decades after that was for companies, you know, like Louis Vuitton, their number one major market for luxury goods. And so for us, it was a great opportunity because wealth was increasing. People were optimistic. They were looking for what we would call the sort of prizes of being the most successful nation. And so we were on really an upward trend. But what was fascinating about Asia is that their self-purchase of diamonds by women was a much bigger factor. And it partly has to do with the whole nature of that society and who controls the money. But the gift giving outside of engagement rings, which was a tradition that De Beers built in Japan, but beyond that, we built this market of women buying diamonds for themselves. And that was both exciting but also challenging because it required us to position diamonds in a different way.
Absolutely. Did De Beers actually bring up and cement basically the whole notion of a diamond for engagement?
Yeah,
could we actually give them? Could we give De Beers?
Yeah,
that
I think De
credibility?
Beers can take credit for that. We've done it in several markets as well. To be honest, we started in America. So in America in the 1940s is when the marketing started. The slogan "A diamond is forever" was written by a young copywriter at an ad agency on Madison Avenue way back then, and that tradition was built firstly in America. We started in Japan in 1966. Diamonds were, prior to then, a banned import, so we started from, again from zero and said, okay, let's replicate what we've done in America. And in Japan, we started by building that bridal tradition from really zero to about 3/4 of all brides in about a 20-year period. And when we've been off replicating that again, China was the next and more recent one. But in Japan, that gave us a bedrock of a business upon which then we could build, the self-purchase market as well.
You were talking about when Japan obviously was in a very good economic cycle. How linked are economic cycles to the selling of diamonds? And we can allude to the most recent crisis, and that's actually basically in the midst of this crisis you launched Forevermark in very strategic areas.
Yeah.
But De Beers has obviously seen the depression, various recessions in the 60s and 70s, so we've actually seen various market crashes.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a correlation between people's economic well-being and their ability in the very short term, to buy any luxury goods. And diamonds are not immune from that, although in some ways we're better positioned than the luxury goods industry as a whole, largely because we have engagement ring tradition, and if you get married and it's still a bad economy, well, you only get married, at least in theory, once, so you still buy that diamond, and that business remains quite steady. And then secondly, of course, in diamonds are in effect a store of value, so there are people in a difficult time, if they're feeling concerned about the health of things like your bank, that holding hard assets is not bad. So we do a little better, but still, obviously, Christmas gifts get postponed until times are better. But as you say, we've been through these cycles many times. We have enormous confidence, proven by history, that it does come back, and usually comes back rapidly and strongly. And that's what we've seen, in the last 2 years. 2010 was a great year, and 2011, despite all the economic turbulence we read about daily, 2011 has been a really excellent year for De Beers so far.
Men are still buying diamonds for women, clearly, despite the volatility.
Yeah, and in greater numbers than the year before.
Looking at China, and I know that you've been very integral in terms of building the Chinese market. I think it's worth around $1.5 billion, the retail market right now. In 1993, I know you've said before that you couldn't actually walk into a store and buy a diamond in China. How was that experience, and how did you change the market so rapidly?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and I guess it's a good example of where sometimes you have to take the long view, and in the long run it pays out. Today, China is the engine of the diamond market. It's still not the biggest market, and won't be for some time, but it is the area where prices are in effect driven. The demand that the Chinese, together with Indian consumers, have, even through these difficult economic times, not difficult for them. So they've been the thing that's pulled the industry, out of the downturn and created this strong sentiment. But when we first went there, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, 1993, I went, and I remember coming in from the airport. There were no cars except the one I was in. Everybody was on a bicycle. There were no motorways. They were being built by ox at the time, and there were no jewelers, there were no diamonds, and consumers didn't know what they were. So we looked at that.
Did you see this as an opportunity, or did you think, well, I'm definitely not going to be able to sell diamonds here for many years to come?
I have to say, there was a part of me that said, have I come too early? But at the same time, I saw the appetite that Chinese living in Hong Kong and Chinese living in Taiwan and in Singapore had for diamonds. So we knew that there was a natural opportunity once the economic growth was sufficient to allow people to move into that. So we knew if we invested now in building the brand diamonds, and what they mean, what they stand for, the concept of them representing life's important moments. If we built that early, we would build aspiration, and when people were able economically to do so, they would. And you know, that's what we've seen today. Today, China represents probably, if we take Greater China, probably 12%. By the end of the decade, it should be 25% of world demand. It'll pass Japan next year and be the second largest market for diamonds in the world. So it was worth the wait, and it was worth the investment, and we're going to benefit from it for 20 years to come.
Do you treat every consumer in the same way? For example, the way that you built your brand in the US and in Canada, and then heading into Japan and obviously India. What about China? Do you treat them in the same fashion?
It's part of, as I said, who knows, I would have used psychology 25 years later. But part of what's made us successful is really understanding the deep consumer motivations. Diamonds are a considered purchase. You don't do it every day. When you do, you think a lot about it. It's not like selecting something off a supermarket shelf where you might think 10 seconds what brand. Diamonds really get into, because they represent love and emotion between couples, that's a complicated thing. So it's important to understand in each culture how that relationship works. And while our positioning is the same in all markets, we want diamonds to be bought for life's most important events. The way in which you communicate that between the different couples is different in every culture. And we have to tailor what we do to make sure it resonates to a Chinese couple who have a different relationship than an American couple or an Indian couple. Interesting that the Chinese, strangely, are more American in their attitudes than many of the other countries we work in. So sometimes people say, oh, they're so different, but when they get married, it's special, it's precious, they want something that is up to that occasion, and you hear many of the same sort of things you would hear from the young American bride.
Absolutely, it's all based on love, isn't it? And anything that shines, of course.
It's pretty universal love, it happens everywhere.
Absolutely. Forevermark, we saw that launched in 2008. We know that you're obviously the CEO of the company currently, but you basically took over from Francois Delage. Tell us about that, because he launched the actual company.
Yeah.
And then you took over.
Francois is a great colleague of mine, and we still work closely together because Francois joined us from LVMH, Louis Vuitton, where he ran their...
he was there for 16 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Indeed, yeah, and he ran their Asian business hugely successfully. I mean, Louis Vuitton in China today is their #1 market, and that's, he had a big part in that. But he came and joined us from Louis Vuitton, because we have a joint venture with Louis Vuitton in the retail business. The De Beers Jewelers retail business is a joint venture between our two companies. So we, in effect, borrowed him to organize the launch of Forevermark and to bring his branding skills. And then he's moved on to run De Beers Jewelers for us, the joint venture company, having learned about the diamond business in Forevermark. And again, timing is everything. I was in the right place at the right time and took over from Francois.
And of course, we'll talk about the timing of the launch of Forevermark right after this short break. And then we also delve into who is Stephen Lussier when he's not looking for diamonds in the rough. We'll find out right after this.